I didn't do it, and I don't deserve to go to prison.
In the early morning hours of January 7th, 2018, police in Belgrade, Montana, respond to a report of gunfire inside a quiet house on Idaho Street. Inside, they find two women. One of them cannot be saved. Within days, detectives will arrest a suspect who insists, calmly, repeatedly, under oath, that he has been falsely accused. He has an explanation for everything: the jacket, the gun, the threats. But every call leaving the Gallatin County Jail is recorded. And one morning in February, a 12-minute phone call to a 17-year-old girl will quietly take his alibi apart, because the person who knows what really happened that night is his own son. Belgrade sits just west of Bozeman. The call that comes in tonight is one officers have never had before. Shots fired inside a residence, at least one woman down. Inside, officers find 35-year-old Lauren DeWise. She is beyond help. In another room, her roommate, Ashley Van Hemert, has been shot 4 times, including once in the back of the head. Somehow, she is still alive. By sunrise, the house on Idaho Street is a homicide scene, and the roommate who found the two women gives police a name before they even ask: Lauren's estranged husband. Lauren Walder. One thing matters before this story goes any further. When Lauren moved out, the children stayed with their father. 3 of them, 2 teenagers from his first marriage, a son and a daughter, and the youngest, the little one, he shared with Lauren. Lauren rented a room just across town, close enough to stay in her children's lives while the divorce moved forward. So remember that house: a father, 3 kids, and a script he would soon write for them. Because that house is where this story is. Walder DeWise was in the middle of a divorce. Months earlier, she had moved out and rented a room from Ashley Van Hemert, a friend who offered her a place to restart. The two were supposed to meet about divorce paperwork the very day Lauren was found dead. What Lauren left behind was documented: recordings of volatile arguments, witnesses who would later describe under oath a pattern of abuse. One voice appears again and again: Joseph Paul DeWise. Questioned by police that same day, DeWise denies any involvement. He mentions, almost casually, that he owns several guns. Officers let him go home. His story never changes. He was home that night, sick, sleeping. A quick midnight run for beer, a few drinks, and back to bed by 2 a.m. There is one problem. Someone else was in his car that night. Joseph Paul DeWise did not look like a man anyone would call dangerous. 47 years old, an Army veteran who liked to talk about his years in the service. A small business owner who ran an Airbnb out of his home in Belgrade and told people he could no longer do heavy work after a mountain biking accident. No adult criminal record at all. On paper, an ordinary man in an ordinary Montana town. But the people inside that house on the quiet street knew a different version of him. He met Lauren Walder when she was young. They traveled the country together, and he would later describe those years, under oath, as the good times. But somewhere along the way, the marriage curdled into something darker. Witnesses would describe control, jealousy, rage that arrived without warning. And Joseph DeWise did something unusual for a jealous husband. He kept records. He recorded his own arguments with his wife on his phone. Hour after hour of shouting, threats, and accusations, saved, catalogued, carried around in his pocket. He hid GPS trackers in Lauren's car and studied where she went. When he caught her with another man, the recordings grew darker. Prosecutors would later say that on those recordings, in his own voice, he threatened to kill her. Not once, at least 5 times. By late 2017, Lauren was done. She took off her ring, filed the paperwork, and moved into a rented room in a house on Idaho Street, the home of Ashley Van Hemert, a friend with a spare room and an open door. A third roommate lived there too. 3 women, 1 quiet house. Lauren was 35 years old, and for the first time in years, she was almost free. The divorce meeting was already on the calendar. She never made it to that meeting. Rewind to the morning of January 7th. While neighbors watched the tape go up, detectives worked the scene inch by inch. The back door frame was splintered. Someone had forced their way in. Shell casings lay scattered where the shots had been fired. And pressed into the snow outside, a line of boot prints, size 6 to 6.5, walking toward the house and away from it. Small boots, almost too small for a grown man. That same day, police brought Joseph DeWise in for questioning. Detective James Esper sat with him, and what struck the detective was not what DeWise said, but how he said it. Calm, quiet, rehearsed, while his body rocked slowly back and forth in the chair. He denied everything, mentioned his guns without being asked, and walked out a free man. Detectives let him go and started digging. The digging went fast. Interviews with friends of the couple painted the same picture. A man who would not accept that his wife had left. The recordings on his phone, the trackers, the threats. On January 11th, 4 days after the murder, officers stopped his car and arrested him for deliberate homicide. His 3 children were inside. Bail was set at $800,000, and Belgrade police made a strange public appeal. They asked the community to look out for 2 missing items, a pair of tan boots and a pistol, because the boots mattered. Detectives had shown the boot prints to DeWise's 15-year-old son. The boy admitted he owned a pair just like them, size 6, but said he had thrown them away weeks earlier. He repeated his father's story about a quiet night at home, word for word, like a script. Then, on January 13th, his mother, DeWise's first ex-wife, flew in from Florida, and with her sitting beside him, the boy asked to talk to detectives one more time. Piece the boy's account together, and the night of January 6th takes shape. Late that evening, his father told him to get in the car. No explanation, no destination. They drove through the dark toward Belgrade, and somewhere on that drive, the boy was handed gloves and a mask. At the house on Idaho Street, his father made him lead the way to the door, a door that would be found splintered by morning. The boy stood in the living room, in the dark of a stranger's house, when he heard the shots. Then his father reappeared, and they drove home in silence. Their phones had been left at the house all evening, as if the night was planned to leave no digital footprints at all. At home, the instructions continued. Take off your clothes, hand over the boots, shower. The ammunition disappeared, and then his father left the house again, alone, into the dark, and came back later without explaining where he had been. Before dawn, the boy had his script. They had stayed home all night, watching television. If he ever told it differently, his father said, DeWise would go to prison. The next morning, as police tape went up across town, Joseph DeWise took his children to church. On the drive home from that church service, police pulled the family over. It was the first time officers looked into the car and saw the children who would one day decide this case. The boy stuck to the script, but his older sister carried a different weight. The morning after the murder, she would later testify, her father had confessed to her directly. She held that secret through the arrest, through the jail calls, through everything. until she took the witness stand and said it out loud, a few feet away from him.
Joe says his father drove him to where Lauren was staying and told him to wear gloves and a mask. Then they broke in, with Joe saying Paul made him lead the way.
He opened the first door in the hallway. Then what happened? He had his pistol in his right hand, and he opened the door with his left. He stepped just into the room, past the threshold, and he turned on the light, and someone was in the room.
Not Lauren. It was Ashley Van Hemert.
The lady said, "Who the F are you?" And he responded with, "Who the F are you?" and shot him 3 times.
Joe says he was standing beside his father as he says Paul DeWise moved on to the next bedroom.
He didn't turn the light on, and I heard my stepmother gasp, and he shot him 2 times. He was terrified, cut off, gasp.
From the Gallatin County Jail, DeWise decides to make a phone call. Every jail line plays a warning before it connects. This call is being recorded. He hears that warning and keeps talking. The jail phones tell their own story. February 6th, 9:23 p.m. DeWise dials his daughter, hears the recording warning, and hangs up after 11 seconds. As if the warning registered, as if he understood. Then, at 6:40 the next morning, he called back, and this time he talked for 12 minutes and 31 seconds. Every word preserved. When prosecutors read the transcript, they filed a brand new felony, tampering with a witness. Before his trial was over, DeWise had collected one more charge on top of that, for punching a detention center officer. According to court documents, DeWise tells his 17-year-old daughter it is, quote, real important that her brother admit it, because if he admits it, DeWise gets out. He reassures her the boy would only be held until 21, that the jail is safe, that the food is good. Prosecutors add a new felony, witness tampering.
DeWise called his daughter from jail, saying that her 15-year-old brother must admit to the murder. DeWise was heard telling her that if her brother took responsibility, he could be out of prison by age 21. DeWise is also charged with attempting to kill another woman who was at the home at the time. Tonight he's being held on.
The trial opened in December 2019, almost 2 years after the murder. 7 days of testimony. The state of Montana called the surviving victim, the children, the detectives, and played the recordings out loud. And for the first time, a packed courtroom heard Joseph DeWise's own voice threatening to kill his wife, over and over, while he sat silently at the defense table listening to himself. Ashley Van Hemert testified about the night itself. She had gone to sleep in her own bedroom and woken to find a man standing over her in the dark. He shot her 4 times, one bullet entering the back of her head, and left her for dead. She lay on that floor, unable to move, for what she believed was almost 9 hours. She survived to point exactly one thing out to the jury. The man who shot her was in that courtroom. Then came the detective with the gun. A couple walking near Trout Meadow Pond had spotted something in the water, a .22 caliber Ruger pistol. The serial number was intact. It traced to a purchase by Joseph Paul DeWise, the same caliber that killed Lauren. The murder weapon he swore he knew nothing about had his name on its paperwork. And there was one more thing on his jacket: gunshot residue.
The courtroom got to hear it themselves. Detective James Esper also testified, having been in the room with DeWise shortly after he was first brought in for questioning.
The person that came in.
Esper says DeWise's demeanor seemed rehearsed, calm, quiet, yet rocking in his chair. In Bozeman, Cody Boyer, MTN News.
And according to court staff, Paul DeWise himself took the stand at the end of today's proceedings.
At trial, nearly 2 years later, the son takes the stand and testifies against his father, describing the trackers hidden in Lauren's car, the gloves, the mask, and the rehearsed story about a quiet night at home. Asked why he repeated that story to police,
The defense fought back the only way it could.
through the boy. On cross-examination, they pressed the son about his lie. Why had he repeated his father's story for almost a week before telling the truth? Why had he never been charged for being in that house? There are two sides to the coin, the defense told the jury. But the boy's answer never changed. He had been following orders. He was afraid of his father. And the physical evidence did not care about either side of any coin. When DeWise finally took the stand in his own defense, he was every bit the man Detective Esper had described 2 years earlier. Calm, rehearsed, certain. The soup, the sickness, the midnight run to the town pump for beer, bed by 2. But under cross-examination, the certainty cracked into something stranger. It's all very fuzzy at this point, he admitted about the most important night of his life. And then, facing the jury, he delivered the line the courtroom would remember. There's a lot of circumstantial evidence out there, and if you took a real good look at your own life, you could be in the same boat I'm in.
Threatened his wife following an audio tape of Paul's voice telling Lauren he would kill her.
I'm not a controlling person. I don't even know how to do that. And anybody who knows me knows that.
And DeWise confirmed he called his daughter from jail too, but denied.
The situation I was in.
DeWise claims the person who killed Lauren and shot Van Hemert is still on the loose.
I have been falsely accused here. I didn't do it. And I don't deserve to go to prison.
Cody Boyer, MTN News.
DeWise's sentencing.
The jury did not need the boat. They needed 2 hours. When the verdict was read, guilty of deliberate homicide, guilty of attempted deliberate homicide, guilty on the weapons count. The hallway outside the courtroom filled with the people who had loved Lauren, holding each other, saying the same words over and over. Hang in there. It's over. Step back, and the alibi that held for 2 years collapsed on 5 exact points. A living witness. Who rode in his car that night? His own voice, captured on his own phone, threatening to kill her. His own gun, pulled out of a pond with his name in its paperwork. His own jacket, carrying gunshot residue he could never explain. And a recorded jail line, where he tried to trade his son's future for his own freedom. Joseph DeWise did not lose to a brilliant detective. He lost to himself 5 times over. And what about the people he left behind? Ashley Van Hemert relearned her life with 1 working arm, dressing, writing, everything all over again. At sentencing, she told the court she could no longer do the things she loved. And still, she made one more statement that stunned the room. She said she did not want Joseph DeWise to die in prison. When he is no longer a threat to anyone, she hoped, he could live out his days in a nursing home. Mercy, from the woman he left on the floor. The children left Montana with their mother back to Florida, carrying what no child should ever have to carry, the knowledge that their testimony helped convict their own father. The boy who was handed gloves and a mask was never charged with anything. He had been 15. He had been afraid. And when it mattered most, he told the truth. And Lauren Walder DeWise is remembered not for the way she died, but for what she was about to do. Start over. She had the room, the plan, and the date on the calendar. She was 1 meeting away from being free.
At sentencing,
In February 2020, the courtroom filled one last time. Ashley's brothers spoke directly to the man who shot their sister. "You tried to kill my sister," one said, and you did a pretty good job of trying." Her mother and her sister told DeWise, one by one, that they forgave him. Then Ashley stood, looked at him without notes, and handed the man who shot her 4 times a Bible with a poem inside. "If God can forgive me an unlimited amount of times," she asked him, "how can I withhold forgiveness from you, Paul?" DeWise spoke for nearly an hour, on and off a written statement. He complained about the prosecutor. He insisted he had never had a problem with his temper. The judge listened, and then sentenced him to 220 years in Montana State Prison, with no eligibility for parole. He was 49 years old. The math is simple. The sentence is forever.
But Ashley's voice rang out the loudest.
"Mr. DeWise, thank you for looking at me. It is well with my soul, what you have done to me."
Then Ashley, to the man who shot her 4 times, including in the back of the head, gave that same man a Bible with a poem, which she brought, but once again, she never needed to look down.
"If God can forgive me an unlimited amount of times, then how can I withhold forgiveness from you?"
The house on Idaho Street
Is still there. An ordinary house on an ordinary street, in a town where officers know most streets by name. Cars pass it every day without slowing down. There is nothing on that quiet block to say what happened inside on a January night in 2018, except the court record and the memory of the people who lived it. But here is the thing this case leaves behind, the part worth sitting with. The warnings were all there, in writing, in audio, before anyone died. The threats were recorded by the man who made them. The pattern was documented. The people around Lauren saw it clearly enough that when officers arrived that morning, the first name out of a survivor's mouth was his. None of it was hidden. It was simply not enough, until it became evidence. Joseph Paul DeWise will die in Montana State Prison. His alibi lasted 2 years, and then it fell apart in a single week of testimony, taken apart by a boot print, a pond, a jacket, a phone, and 2 teenagers who finally stopped being afraid. This has been the case of the state of Montana versus Joseph Paul DeWise. Real footage, real records, real verdicts.